recorded live.
Hello, and welcome to the Virtualization and Cloud Security Roundtable episode number 99. We've been doing this for 198 weeks. We're looking forward to our 100th episode in 2 weeks. But today, we have with us a special guest who's been on a number of times in the past, and we're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to his heart. But before we go, joining us on our panel is Eben Rodriguez, who works as a Cloud Solutions Advisor for CA Technologies.
Hello.
And welcome for joining us. Thank you for joining us, Eben.
Yep.
Michael Berman, who's an independent consultant and subject matter expert in security virtualization, will be joining us as soon as he can. And I hope that's soon. And myself, Edward Haletke, a.k.a. TechSciWill, in the VMware community forums, Twitter, Skype, you name it, that's who I am, and author of the book VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security, as well as VMware ESX and ESXi in the Enterprise 2nd edition. And today our special guest is Phil Cox, Director of Security and Compliance at RightScale. Now, Phil's been on a number of times. He's at sec_prof on Twitter. And you've been dealing with visibility of performance security data as relates to performance, or performance data as relates to security, or something of that nature. Phil, take it away and explain what you're looking at.
Yeah, so the problem that I'm addressing or looking into is how do you get the same level of visibility in a cloud environment? So I guess let me start. RightScale as a company is all in cloud. We, I've said this before and others, we have embraced the cloud. We have like 100 and something SaaS applications that we use, SaaS paths. We deploy our production application as a SaaS service in a public infrastructure as a service cloud, or multiple clouds. So we've kind of embraced that.
You don't have a data center. You have a cloud.
We don't have a data center, right? We use other people's. We rent, so to speak. So with that, I came from a consulting environment that everything was, people had data centers, they own them, and I helped deploy a number of, SIMs or security monitoring systems. And in those environments, you've got access to the, raw firewall logs. You've got access to, span ports on switches. You've got access to applications. So from the standpoint of what you have visibility into in a traditional enterprise, it's effectively anything you want. Now, how do you set it up? How do you use it? All of those things are not problematic, but are heavy lifting. But you have access to it. So when I came to RightScale and looking at how do I do security event monitoring in this cloud environment for not only our platform but the whole corporation, it becomes a much tougher deal. And kind of looking at that is how do we get visibility? What currently exists? What doesn't exist that I think as as an industry we should push for? And a lot of this in the back of my mind is driven by the terminology and things I see coming out of the government, like continuous monitoring. It's a great thought.
That's a great thought, but they have not yet defined what continuous means.
Exactly. And it's like
continuous for them could be
even
once every 3 months.
Yeah. So, but at being proactive in this, so I've been looking at it. And in particular, I think there are kind of 3 aspects of the visibility that I look at that most people that consume cloud, have access to. One is if you're an infrastructure as a service. So, for example, our SaaS service that we provide utilizes infrastructure as a service. Well, the way it sits, I'd love to be able to get logs and information from the actual hypervisors or underlying technology that host our systems. For the information that was specific to my box, I would love to know when an admin actually logged into the hypervisor that one of my instances was running on. I'd like to have that to be able to, have it as part of it.
Actually, then you get into a different issue. Actually, this is what you're bringing up is something I've been looking at as well for a very long time, and I'm big into visibility, but I don't think you're ever going to get that level of knowledge. And let me.
So I look at it and say, I like that.
But let me finish.
Yep.
They're not logging into the hypervisor to do work on your instance. Therefore, you don't really have a right to see that data. That is let's look at a cloud. Let's look at this from a perspective of I'm a cloud tenant. What should I be able to see is one thing. What do privacy laws protect me from seeing that I shouldn't be seeing, right? You got to deal with that. And what is shared and never going to be split up into multiple different log files or even tags within log files today, right? So if we when we look at the bottom, the hypervisor doesn't tag anything. If you log in as the hypervisor into the hypervisor, you're going in as a delegate user, usually, because you're coming in from a higher level management platform to this delegate user. The delegate user has no idea who's actually doing what. It logs that that I'm doing this action. Now, if it's on a VM that you own, you should be able to see that log. We can do that correlation right today, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
However, we don't know who actually did it. We just know it happened. You have to go higher up the management stack to get that information. And you're not going to get those logs because they don't really want you knowing their admin names.
Yeah, and so I don't disagree with anything that you...
security nightmare, right?
Well, yeah, potentially. So getting back to kind of the way I look at it is that in my traditional enterprise, right, I knew who potentially SSH'd in or accessed my my VMware hypervisor or my Zen hypervisor, things like that. I don't have that now, and that visibility is not there. And but we could have an argument: is that should I have access to that? I think at some level there's a partition that I should. At another level, I shouldn't. But that's Phil, not there.
But Phil, you knew that a person used an account that you know of, right? You can assume that that person logged in using Phil Cox's account. But do you know it was actually Phil Cox that logged in? Even in the traditional sense, do you know beyond a shadow of a doubt the identity of the person that did that effort?
Well, that all depends on the authentication mechanism, right?
Well, if
you had to give a blood sample and a DNA sample, then maybe the answer is yes. But for the most part, no. There isn't. But again, this is going a little bit off track. My point was that there's this level of visibility that you have in an enterprise that you don't have in a cloud environment, and that at this point in time is just not available. The cloud providers, like you said, for a number of reasons, be it good or bad, whether I agree with it or not, they don't provide that. So what do we have? So from the standpoint of infrastructure as a service, it becomes, the way I look at it, and security event monitoring in that sense, is you've got the traditional, syslog or, Windows event log. You've got your system logs that you have to do something with, right? So now I've got this, and be it system logs or even applications that are running on that box. How do what do you do? Do you do host-based intrusion detection in that environment? And when we're talking about infrastructure as a service, really, that's what we're talking about. And you may do this different ways, central log collection and do alerting there, or actually on the host itself. But so when I looked at it, for our infrastructure as a service, you don't have NIDS per se. You have to do everything on the host. You have to think about it from a host-centric standpoint.
Well,
how do you do that? What's that?
But do you? And
yes.
If your software as a service, yes. If your infrastructure as a service, maybe not.
Well, so I utilize, our platform utilizes infrastructure as a service clouds.
Mm-hmm.
How would I, as a infrastructure as a service consumer, do anything other than host-based intrusion detection without my cloud provider, giving me a service called network intrusion detection or something like that?
Well, and that's where you need to look at things a little bit differently. This is actually the big debate. Should the cloud provider be providing this information and then boil it up to me at the host level, at the cloud network level, or whatnot? Or should I, as the tenant, be providing my own tools? If I have the right constructs, I can do that.
As the tenant, you're limited to what you can do. Now, what you could do as a
you go back to traditional mechanisms, don't you?
So, give me an example of. So let's use Amazon as our case in point. So you've got an instance or a set of instances running on Amazon. How would you do network intrusion detection on that?
Inline firewalls, inline devices, right in the network, right in my network. Or I would use agents inside the VMs. Again, I have to fall back on what we consider to be traditional data center techniques, not using specific ones. Yeah,
so I would say that, and in this sense, if you throw an agent on a VM that looks at the network traffic, I still consider that host-based intrusion detection because it's happening on the host. It's not at your router, at your IDS system, those type of things. Now, putting up, let's say, a virtual.
When I say host, I'm thinking the virtualization host. I don't think of the VM running inside of it. So let's be very clear what we're talking about. When you mean host, what are you talking about?
When I mean host, I should say instance.
Yeah, let's be clear here, Ed. We're talking about Amazon. Amazon provides the hypervisors, right? And then as a consumer, I can go to Amazon and get virtual machines. So host-based intrusion detection would be where you put it in the virtual machines yourself and manage it yourself.
Yeah, but host-based intrusion detection within inside of a virtual environment means something entirely different.
All right. Well, we're asking a theoretical question. How would you do host-based intrusion detection at the hypervisor level if we were using Amazon?
I would not be using host-based intrusion detection because host-based intrusion detection in a cloud and virtual environment means something entirely different than what you're talking about. I would use virtual machine at the virtual machine level. I would actually have agents in the VM, and if I had any control over the network whatsoever, and in some cases in Amazon I do, I would put an inline IDS device.
Okay. Like a virtual
client. So
that's an interesting
IDS. And that's effectively what as a tenant, that's all you can do because you don't have visibility below that.
Well, not at Amazon.
Not in many clouds, actually.
And again, we can even, and I think having the discussion, because I'm not aware of anyone that does that, but let's limit it to public clouds, just because I understand if you own it.
Someone does.
So are there?
Someone does. Michael, you're on the phone?
Yes, I am.
Your old company did stuff in Amazon. What did you do?
Yes. Well, the issue is you could create an instance that you can basically route your traffic through an instance and have that instance behave as a bastion for other instances. But it requires, proper use of Amazon's public and private networking such that your bastion instance is the gateway for your other instances. It's actually difficult to do.
But it can be done.
It can be done. It would be better It would be better if you had a public cloud where they allowed, the term I would use, a DOM zero appliance, right? So there, Capper does this in private cloud all the time, where they run a privileged instance that is the Capper virtual appliance, and it's much simpler to make that work. And in fact, in that kind of a circumstance, a virtual security appliance can enforce the fact that it's working because it's in a privileged position in terms of its communication with the hypervisor via the hypervisor APIs. Amazon does not allow, whether you call it DOM zero or root level, Amazon doesn't allow that root level access to the hypervisor.
But you can do it using, as you said, proper use of Amazon's network, or use layer 3 routing to route things around so that it always goes through your bastion.
Correct, but that introduces a level of complexity and
that
difficulty
people have today in their data centers, don't they?
Yeah, and difficulty of assurance and potential single points of failure. I mean,
Right. Don't they have that today in their physical data centers? I know a bunch of them that do layer 3 routing to ensure they get through their security devices today inside of physical environments because everybody's using blades. So is that any different than what we're doing if we go to a cloud instance with virtual machines?
Right, but in the physical world, we're not doing elastic provisioning the way we are in Amazon.
Well, I mean, let's assume, I agree with you, it's not that way, but the routing protocols and all that are actually inside of the virtual machines. They're not anywhere else.
Correct. I mean, you can. I'm just saying it's harder. It's more complicated.
But I guess I'm going back to the question is, what's the difference between me doing that when I have 500 blades and me doing the exact same thing when I have 500 VMs? To use a Palo Alto today, for example, the Palo Alto Networks device, if I really wanted to make the most effective use of it, I have to route everything through it.
Right.
If I'm going to do a Palo Alto Networks virtual device, I have to do the exact same thing.
Right.
So if I'm going to make use of an existing firewall construct, or UAM or next-gen firewall, whatever you want to call it, whether I'm physical or virtual, I'm still playing around with routing.
And my point is that if you think about cloud in the same way you think about your traditional data center, you're doing it wrong. That it is different paradigm.
Why?
That's absolutely right, and that's why I'm kind of hesitating as Ed is walking me through this, because
all right. Here's the deal. Let's give our guests 5 or 10 minutes to go through this without interruption.
All right. So with that, looking at it, there wasn't the transparency. So what we determined is the best way to go about getting the visibility we needed to was utilizing, again, kind of a host-based host-based system that leveraged syslogs, the event logs and things on the actual box itself, pushing that to a centralized collector and doing alerting there as well.
Again, so you're doing NVM agents to grab syslog data.
Yeah. In particular, one of the things that we use a commercial product for our PCI compliance stuff, Cloud Passage, to do some of that alerting. In our platform, what we're doing, we may end up going with Cloud Passage, in the long run, or Sumo Logic or something like that. But right now, we're looking at OSEC as an agent that we can run. I talked to Bill Burns at Netflix, and that's something that they really like, and they've used it. So we're looking at that, doing collection with that. So that kind of takes care of, in a sense, it gives us some level of visibility while it's not completely the same as in an enterprise environment. It does give us application logs, system logs, things that we can do, set rule sets, alerts, alarm on, etc. And it works in that elastic environment. systems come up, they go down, we provision, deprovision, OSEC. It works. Same thing with Cloud Passage on how those things work. What I found, and the thing that's got me kind of, for lack of better words, flabbergasted right now, is that I mentioned that we have I think upwards to 100 different SaaS vendors. The ability to pull the logs that I want from almost all of those SaaS vendors is non-existent. You can't get that. There's no API where some of them provide it, but most of them don't provide an API for me to know who logged in, what they did. And so what I found, kind of walking down that, is infrastructure as a service. I'm building the operating systems. I'm building the applications. I can use a more traditional syslog centralized collector. There are things like Cloud Passage out there that allow me, Sumo Logic, Splunk, et cetera, that allow you to kind of do that. When you get to the PaaS or even the SaaS-based providers, it's like the visibility goes away. The ability to pull that into kind of a centralized monitoring. So that's the one thing I've found. I will say and seeing that, I've been able to kind of work with our product team because we provide a SaaS-based solution. It's like, listen, this is a deficiency in the market for SaaS-based solutions, that we need to be able to provide that type of visibility to our customers. And so,
who's to say you can't get it today? I mean, you have 100 different SaaS implementations that you're dealing with. If all you want to do is find out who logged in and who did not, that's actually fairly easy to get out of your current systems.
But what I'm telling you is that it's not. What I'm saying is that it is not. Right? I'm living this. It's not like it's simple to do. You do. What most of them have is you can go log in and export something to an Excel spreadsheet. And then
you're depending on the SaaS to provide that information. I'm not. I'm thinking entirely different. Right now, you have the capability to say, hey, if I'm using 100 different SaaS applications from 100 different locations, why not just centralize all the access into one location or two locations and use a gateway? You'll know exactly what's happening that way.
Yeah, but that's not, so from a standpoint, we're worldwide, that having a gateway or something like that's just not practical. Again, the interesting part is what I found, coming from a very, very traditional environment, and the way I think is I look at a lot of this, and it's not dawned on me. I've kind of known this, but now I'm living it, is that it's different. We've got people accessing these SaaS providers from multiple locations. You can't put it through a gateway. You can't require them to VPN into your corporate and then go outbound to the SaaS providers. It doesn't work anymore. These things, you can't even, we use Okta as a centralized authentication store. So what we're trying to do for a lot of those is centralize that authentication and account management and provisioning. But even then, it's just a handful of systems that really utilize like a SAML and a provisioning or an XACML to be able to set those up. You've still got, most SaaS applications, you can do your best, but somebody can still go in and change their password via a kiosk at the airport, and you have no control over it. And it's just interesting to me. Again, from the visibility standpoint, I'd love to be able to have that log that says, hey, Ed changed his password. Oh, wait a minute. He didn't come through the, our Okta thing. Have that come into my central logging system and have that alert. That type of correlation and the ability to do that and have that type of visibility into the environment is just, right now, it is super heavy lifting to get that done. And in some cases, it's not even possible, which is frustrating. So back to
I agree with you. SaaS is defined as let's get the software out. Who cares about security? And definitely they don't care about compliance.
So,
and from that standpoint,
you mentioned
the only ones that I know that do have something like that have been around for years, and they've had to fight those battles.
You mentioned changing password is something you might want to log. A lot of third-party cloud SaaS providers, I can think of Salesforce and Gmail and maybe a few others, allow integration to your identity management solution.
Exactly.
And so there should be a way to see, I would imagine, I know some of these offer a log to your company of who's accessing the system, like an access log.
And what I'm saying
so forth.
Is that from the standpoint of actually doing this, there are. And the ones you mentioned, Google, Salesforce, a lot of those, they'll implement SAML. So what we do is we just have a central repository where that user has to change their account there. But there is a number, at least 70% of the SaaS applications we have that we use don't implement SAML. They use usernames and passwords. And, Okta has an interesting little thing, like I think it's called the secure password authentication or web something. And basically what they do is they'll go provision the account and create a super secret password and store it. And then you have to log into Okta to then use that SaaS that doesn't have, the more robust authentication mechanisms or authorization mechanisms. But there's nothing that prevents you from actually going to the SaaS provider and saying, reset my password. And it'll send you, it's got your email associated with it. It'll send you a link to reset your password. And
do you know if Amazon offers anything like that for their services?
I believe that Amazon, like in their management control, I think they're SAML. And I think Edward mentioned it, the big guys, the people that have been around a long time and that have a lot of, they're the ones that are doing this right. They implement SAML. They've got APIs for you to pull events from. It's not them that I'm finding kind of interesting. It's the 70% of the small guys.
I see.
It's not even the small guys that are doing it. Some of the really big guys are also doing it. Try doing that with Twitter, for example. Huge. Not going to happen. Facebook, probably the same way. Because
wasn't it just last year that they even started supporting HTTPS, some of these guys?
I know, but remember, these companies are not designed for enterprises or
exactly. I would agree, 100%.
For the consumer.
So it has to do with the level of security of the data that you're protecting. So having a data classification standard would enable you to say, well, Twitter, Facebook, these are all public-facing. You don't post sensitive information on these. But if you're using Google for email or Salesforce for forecasting sensitive information, that's where you're going to need to have all these, better security controls, stronger controls, centralized authentication.
Until someone starts selling something on Twitter where you can actually put in your credit card number on Twitter and get something with a DM, that's not going to happen.
Right. So it's good to have companies allow people to use these services as long as there's training and education goes along with it.
I'll guarantee
to say that they shouldn't put sensitive information there.
I mean, we can say that till we're blue in the face. We can actually say that the policy is you don't put sensitive information out on Facebook.
Don't put passwords in paste bin. Oops.
Yeah, that's right. But the problem is people still do it, regardless. They overlook it. They forget about it. They're in a rush. People are people. That, depending on people to impose your security requirements, I'm sorry, it's just a losing battle.
Yeah. So back to, I guess, part of the, kind of my thoughts in this whole monitoring aspect or security monitoring in the cloud is that for the largest, what was interesting to me is for the largest base of cloud consumption services, which are SaaS-based services, it is the ability to do kind of enterprise and correlated logging is woefully inadequate. Most people don't have that, and that was kind of a surprise to me. It shouldn't have been, but it was. I would have expected the ability to pull things out of those SaaS providers, and it just wasn't there. Back to the infrastructure as a service, and when I say SaaS, that was SaaS or PaaS, either one of those. As infrastructure as a service, again, it's doable, and there are tools out there, both public and free or public, open source or commercial that allow you to do that and be relatively comfortable that you've got some decent visibility and you're going to catch things that matter. And so,
you mentioned one that's great at that, Cloud Passage. That's the whole thing.
Yep, Cloud Passage is great. Again, there's a number of folks I know. I'm always a little. I present with the Cloud Passage guys. They're great, great guys, and they got a great product. And there's a number of people out there that are doing that type of thing, and I think it's just going to get better, as things happen. But for those that are out there, and I guess I throw not the challenge, but I throw the challenge out there to anybody who does provide a SaaS-based service to, provide that visibility. Give your users the ability to be able to pull those things into a centralized logging system. Most of the time you're not getting.
But is it all about logging? And that's the big question.
If you don't have the information,
when I go there, I go about a centralized logging information. You have 100 SaaS providers. If they gave you every little bit, you better be using Splunk as your back end, the Splunk cloud, to process all that data.
Well, from a security standpoint,
you're still not going to get real-time alerts. You're going to get an alert that could be an hour old. To me, that's not real-time.
Well, but it doesn't have to be real-time. That's the point. Maybe it does in certain situations, but if it's got to be real-time, then why are you using SaaS provider that doesn't do that? So if you've got a security requirement that says I have got to have real-time alerting, I have got to know within seconds, if not milliseconds, of when something happens, then you have no business using a public SaaS provider or a public infrastructure as a service provider for all that matters. There's nothing that says somebody can't sit there and inject TCP random bits in your packets and cause the checksums to fail.
That's a different type of security that needs to be done as well. You're talking about monitoring log files from SaaS providers. I agree with you. That has to be done. But that's not a real-time action. That is something that has to require correlation and all that wonderful stuff.
And that's where I'm saying what I would like is I would like the ability to consume those. And the other interesting part of this is I throw out there as a problem that we've run into as a SaaS provider, being able to provide that to our customers is how do you do it? Because the traditional, point my instant, well, we've got a SaaS. We don't have syslog. We don't send syslogs from our SaaS service. We've come up with a mechanism using queues that allow people to consume things. That way they're reliable, they can be consumed. So the actual mechanism on how you consume it from the SaaS provider, I think is going to be interesting. Not only the fact that how do you do it? What do you give them? Do you have it? Can you provide some visibility? Whatever that happens to be. Maybe it's rudimentary, maybe it's very detailed. But then how do you do it? Most people in an enterprise, like, I got my event log reader, or I'm gonna send everything via syslog.
I guess you're missing the point I was trying to make. It's not about log files. Never has been. Log files are great for compliance requirements and going through and trying to find out what was happening in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Logs are always in the past. Makes sense. Are always in the past.
Hold on. Logs can also be used to alert on current situations and drive firewall changes, etc.
They are always in the past. Always.
By definition, I agree.
By definition, they could be minutes, they could be
hours,
reactive. They could be seconds. They could be broken and missing data because our syslog or syslog wasn't reset properly.
Yep.
Right.
You got data with massive holes in it.
Okay.
Or could be. Or
potentially,
you end up with terabytes upon terabytes of logs. And that's just 1 hour.
Okay.
Okay, you got massive amounts of data that is not correlatable in any way, shape, or form except for a date timestamp that could be wrong, and you don't know. You could be looking at something and say, hey, this is all this, and it ends up being you're looking at a date timestamp that's been off by 4 hours for 4 years, and you never know.
So what are you
saying
how's
we shouldn't use logs? In the enterprise?
Excuse me?
I just said, are you saying we shouldn't use logs?
Oh, no, I'm saying logs are part of the picture, but I'm not sure they're the entire picture.
Oh.
I think that there's another piece of this puzzle that needs to be put in there, and that is even in SaaS providers, and that is application performance management logs or data. Literally real-time alerting that, hey, someone went into, and I get this out of Salesforce, by the way. They do it right. Someone puts a new device in my Salesforce account. I know exactly who did it and when they did it. I get alerted immediately. That is built into their application, that type of alert.
But what you're saying,
performance management alerts you can get. So, for example, let's say I run a website or I'm using the RightScale product, right? Your SaaS.
Yep.
If you use application performance management techniques inside your SaaS, you would know that's what you do. You got to figure out how fast it is, right?
Yep.
What happens if someone started to break in and you notice they're going down a different path than normal?
Yep.
Those are things you can get alerted on immediately and put up a stop.
Right, and what I would argue is that the way you're alerting on that, though, is logs. And I didn't mean to imply
I'm not talking about logs
was taking
I'm talking about letting the APM tools give you sub-second alerts based on the data that they're seeing right away by call structure, not logging.
Yeah, and I think that's, I would agree with you that that's part of the solution, right?
But the other part of it, not the big part,
is, to me, unless you have the information, be it in memory, like you're talking about, or a call, a system memory, a system call, or in an actual flat file or something where you've got to have the information in order to either make decisions on alerts and actions. And I guess my point in looking at it is that coming up and trying to do this, trying to actually implement it in a cloud environment, having done it in a traditional enterprise, there were things that I stumbled upon that were, again, surprising to me. And it's like, oh, this is different. Okay, I don't have as much visibility. I can do this at a level that makes me feel okay in an infrastructure as a service. When I went to these other things, it was like, wow, I can't get what I want from a lot of people here. And that was just, again, it is what it is. It's not something that I can change, but it's something that I could say, listen, SaaS providers, think about providing this visibility. And like you're saying, Ed, if an additional part of that may be, instrumenting the application, certain parts of the application that know these things happen and can do real-time alerting for those, for those type of issues. We happen to do that
for the critical,
mostly by our ops
critical
team.
actions, right? The critical actions, you absolutely need that, whatever those are. And to me, that's continuous. If you can have it built into the SaaS app, you'll get continuous monitoring.
Yeah, but then it's like, how do you expose that, or how do you give visibility to that to those different customers? It's a non-trivial problem right now, and we're just kind of my point of wanting to have this discussion is that this thing is very, very immature, and the providers, if you're trying to do this in real life, then some things work well, others you just don't get frustrated because it just doesn't work all that well right now. It will get better. You get smart people talking about it. It'll be differentiators. I believe I'm very, very I'm looking forward to whenever HP's public cloud actually gets gets kind of going and gets some traction, because I know some things about it, and from this visibility standpoint that could be very, very cool to drive some of the industry. So, there are things like that I'm excited about, but there are other parts where it's like, wow, I just didn't expect that.
I think that this SaaS needs to do a couple of different things. And Michael, you and I have talked about this in the past. If I was a SaaS provider, there has to be a way to tag a tenant's flow, whether it's being logged or it's to a log file like syslog, or I need to be able to tag it as in a code path and say, your tenant A, here's the data you have. Your tenant B, here's your data. And of course there's going to be some shared stuff in there. But if we don't have the ability to even do that, can we get the data out effectively?
Well, you have to do per tenant tagging of some kind, usually with metadata.
Mm-hmm.
So normally, we talk again, from prior experience. If you look at NetFlow, NetFlow has a normal, say, 9-tuple that is great data, but in a cloud situation, you spoke to this before, you might come across privacy concerns or confidentiality concerns. You have to add additional, tuples, if you will, to the normal NetFlow data so that other information, logical information about the tenant or even the zone within a tenant, so that you can correctly, parse out that information and, comply with, both your security requirements and perhaps privacy requirements for, where you happen to be operating.
And
if you're not able
doesn't that tuple have to be unique even amongst clouds? Because your data could be moving between multiple different, like, for example, I could be going from Amazon Cloud A to Amazon Cloud B.
Ideally,
tuple has to be unique.
Well, ideally, it would be. I could see requirements. I could see situations where it doesn't have to be unique at the time it's logged. So, for instance, you could have a metadata key ID that's unique within the cloud, and then when that data is moved out of that cloud, you then append another unique key of the cloud provider to those keys. So you could compose, a worldwide unique tag from separate, from individual parts. So within a particular cloud provider, a customer ID might not be unique, but if you then add the cloud ID to the customer ID, it becomes unique. If you follow me?
Yes. The unique, and actually, isn't there a project going on for a unique cloud identifier that crosses
I don't know,
boundaries?
but it's logically pretty, easy to implement. It could be as simple as a byte string, Amazon, Rackspace, Terramark, a prefix to then a customer ID, and you've got a unique ID in that mechanism. And then you just have to rely on the cloud provider to assure that they are using worldwide, worldwide may be a misnomer in this case, but at least unique naming within their cloud. But it's not that hard to actually come up with a worldwide unique name. SHA-256 collisions are very, very unlikely. So, if you created a SHA-256 hash for your customer and use that as part of your metadata tagging, it's extremely, I would say it's mathematically infeasible, right, that another customer would accidentally have that same hashtag.
Okay. And even, what do you think? Do you think anybody's able to do that today?
Well, I didn't hear anybody talk.
Can't hear you even. Okay. And Phil, do you think that would satisfy your requirements for compliance?
Yeah, it might. I think that it's a step in the right direction. I think being able to do that. honestly, I don't know. Because it is so different. It's hard for me to just say, yeah, that would do it. It just seems like for this environment, what needs to happen and traditionally hasn't, and this kind of gets to that point, is kind of the sharing. How do we collaborate together? How do we kind of make this stuff work together, providing visibility that you need to, but maintaining the privacy things, all the legal aspects that you were talking about. And I think that it's just, right now, it's just super hard, and that there isn't a good technical solution. Again, I think a lot of smart people are looking at it and are working on it, and I bet, if we have this conversation in a couple of years, it'll be different. But right now, it's just, heck, hate to say it, I just like to have an API where I can grab some events from my SaaS providers.
To be frank, I don't think anybody's working on it.
Well, I see like Anton Chavakin, he does a lot of, he's been talking a lot about this. So I see discussions about it, and I know that, for example, I know we actually devote engineering effort to providing that visibility to our customers. And I'm guessing, because our customers are asking for it, I'm guessing other SaaS providers are getting those asks, and that over that period of time, slowly but surely, right, we'll start getting things, things will start getting out there.
But you say you think the IIS, for infrastructure as a service, you think you have it covered. SaaS will require engineering of the application to give that to you. Infrastructure as a service actually doesn't have it, in my opinion.
No, I don't think it's covered. I'm just saying what I can get from my instances by using something like an OSEC or Cloud Passage or Splunk or Sumo Logic gives me a reasonable level of visibility. There's a lot of stuff I'd like to see improved, and I think that I'd like for my cloud provider to be able to provide me more details. If I had a question, right? If I was doing something forensics, if I wanted to, somebody asked me a question about something, I'd like to be able to have some visibility into events that happened beneath my virtual machine that potentially could have affected my virtual machine. And
that's where I think they're missing, is that even the hypervisor vendors are the ones that would have to solve that. The problem is, and this has been going on for years, look at it this way. Let's pick on OpenStack. Why not?
Yeah.
With OpenStack, I go off, I log in as my user to the interface. Once I'm in the user interface, I contact Nova via a delegate user. It's not me logging into Nova, it's a delegate user logging into Nova. Nova eventually will deploy my compute resources, and then I have to log into Quantum, again, a delegate user to set up the networking. And now if we pick on vCloud Director and vSphere and Amazon, and we look at Amazon and we look at Azure, we're all logging into some UI with our usernames, and that's getting delegated to somebody else. We have no control over who that somebody else is. So I do an action on my cloud tenancy. Who's to say someone else isn't doing a similar action on my tenancy? Once I get down to where it really counts, all they know is that this authorized delegate user is implementing this action, which is to destroy that VM. And we have no idea tracing back, looking at that and saying who actually issued the command to destroy the VM. All we know is that it was destroyed.
And that's where I feel like people understand that there are these gaps, and over time, I think there will be solutions that come in to fix that. I don't think it's going to be quick.
Yes, sorry, I was going to interject. That gap is not a law of nature. That gap is a mistake. It's correctable.
It is, but I'm not sure. Is anybody really working on doing that you know of?
Well, this infringes on the automation system. I would ask, I don't know enough, but I mean, if you look at what Puppet does, and Puppet's sort of in this same universe, it probably does provide an automation linkage that would allow you.
Puppet uses the delegate user as well.
Right. But it allows you to connect the dots between the delegate user and the real user.
Yes, if you can get the Puppet or Chef or the high trusts of the world to actually provide you a log file that you can then ingest as a tenant. Again, I have to ingest it as a tenant. I can't ingest it as the cloud provider.
Right. You'd have to have somebody, who is in this space, who then is using Puppet and enhancing the data with the appropriate meta tags so that data can then be sorted and streamed out, if you will, on a per-tenant basis. But I'm just trying to point out that it's not infeasible, just because we don't know of anybody doing it. We're talking about an unmet need. Maybe that's an opportunity.
But this has been around the same need has been around and brought up year after year after year after year. I mean, it's been brought up since virtualization.
Let me add my 2 cents to this. One of the things that's changing in the industry and the data center, especially moving to cloud, is the idea of software-defined networking. Whether you're using VXLAN, FTP protocol, or other types of these newer data center connection protocols, they have the concept of a tenant ID, which is embedded in the Ethernet packet. So you can use that. I see the next step for us is to be able to leverage this network tenant ID, which is embedded in all the network traffic, for logging.
Now, that would be useful. So the network SCN, if you're thinking about OpenFlow and VXLAN, they have that built into it. They added some tuples. That's great. But what happens if I have something that spans multiple clouds? I do OpenFlow that goes between 3 or 4 different types of clouds.
So you're going to need some way to unify that, just like you track your IP addresses, your host names, etc.
Okay. Again, some uniform cloud ID or something like that. Unique cloud.
Yeah, but we're finally at the point where you can have a common tenant ID across all your data centers, or let's say you have different tenant IDs in each data center, you know which one's yours, and then you can track your traffic, your machines, your class of service through some sort of shared common logging system that the data center provider can give you, and they know that these tenant IDs belong to this tenant, these other tenant IDs belong to that tenant, and then they can, you're asking how to segregate the log data. They will know how to segregate the log data to ensure the right tenant gets to see the right data.
But would that be enough if I'm not using SDN to do anything? In other words,
this concept definitely requires one of these newer software-defined networking technologies.
Well, if I'm using SDN, and let's say VXLAN or one of the other ones, I can set that up on a per-tenant basis, but I can't set it up for the underlying hypervisor level yet. And even then, I wouldn't be able to get it because, if you're thinking about VMware, I have the parent domain, the provider data center is going to have its own tenant ID, even though it has multiple tenants inside of it. See what I'm saying? So knowing who logged in to modify a VM, if it's only going into the provider VDC, I may never find that out, even using this technique. It needs to go deeper than that. I think it needs to go all the way down to the bare metal.
It may need to go to the bare metal in certain applications. I could certainly think of a few in the higher security realm where it has to go to the bare metal. Mm-hmm. But I think you're kind of over solving here, or overthinking in the cases of many commercial instances or commercial needs, because enough can vary, right? Enough does it satisfy my risk mitigation requirements, assuming I'm doing a risk management analysis at all. A lot of people view enough as, is it as good or better than what I have today? enough from, Ed and, your perspective, my perspective, Eben's perspective, when we're putting on our paranoid security guy's hat, enough is a pretty high bar. But really from a practical commercial security point of view, for many tenants, we're already oversolving. I mean, I think there's the opportunity here to give people much better security in a much more automated and transparent way. You've identified there's this gap because when you get down to the service account user, a lot of people lose the connection between who was doing it and, what was done. And the two logs will mismatch. And from a forensics point of view, we know that's a nightmare.
Yeah,
and it's a worse nightmare if the clocks aren't in sync. At least if the clocks aren't in sync, I can find a way to correlate, right? But if the clocks aren't in sync, and the clocks, as we know, are often not in sync, I've got a real problem. So we need the operator, whether it's an enhancement to Puppet or the proper use of Puppet, or it's a cloud scaling or a VMware, people who are in the business of making this cloud stack stuff work better to provide the APIs.
Well,
so that the third-party community can provide the applications that use those APIs.
Okay, but let's take one step further. Let's take what Eben said. Let's take what Phil said. Phil's having a problem with his 100-plus SaaS providers. Eben recommended...
But there's no common API.
Well, they have no common API, but could those 100-plus SaaS providers be connected through something that gives you some tenant ID to be able to get the information?
Well, the tenant ID could be the tenant's credit card. I mean, there's a lot of simple ways to have a universal ID.
It could be just a credit card, but that's all right.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying, there's
I'm sure PCI would be all over that one as a problem.
Well, no, I'm just saying, tenants provide lots of information that allows a cloud provider to come up with a unique ID. And certainly the credit card number is one of those pieces of information. I'm just saying, and it becomes universal because in a way, if that's your salt to your hash algorithm, then that same tenant going to two different cloud providers will end up with the right unique ID. Wouldn't that be marvelous? But in any case, I mean, there's a way to solve this problem, right? But I think the bigger problem is what Phil was pointing out is he's talking to 100 different SaaS providers who built 100 different applications, from ground up or whatever, and of course their APIs are all different. But then is there can we point them at a standards body? Does the CSA cloud audit standard solve this problem? And Phil can just say, hey, you may not know this, but there's this common data interchange format that the CSA folks have come up with, and if you could just provide me this data in this format using this REST or this other kind of mechanism, I could do this, and maybe people will migrate that way. Certainly the federal government, in their procurement power, is doing this now with the Security Content Automation Protocol. I don't know if that's enough for Phil. I suspect it isn't. But again, it's an example of where people's the power of the purse will dictate that everybody use a particular standard for data information exchange.
Well, and I think that, like you talk about the SCAP stuff with the government, I think that that's in a sense, whether it turns out to work or not will be that's kind of, time will tell. But I think I think that is what I'm talking about. I like the fact that it's like, hey, we need to do this. Here's what we need. As opposed to different SaaS vendors figuring out, these are the type of events or these type of, here, we'll give you this, other people give us that. Having some standardization in terms of what you can expect, what's there to be able to use for correlation, so you can, pull from a bunch of different sources. So it is common is exactly what I would love to see. And like you said, the government's pushing it.
But I'm thinking about one other thing. Let's say the vast majority of these SaaS providers are running and could be running inside of Amazon. Let's say maybe 20% of them are. is there something that we can do with SDN inside of Amazon to give us the data we need without actually having the SaaS providers that have to change their application at all?
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to address that.
We're always going with Eben's comment on
I wanted to address that concern that for SDN to work, it needs to be embedded in the physical network. SDN works by replacing the standard open virtual switch modules that come with the OS, whether it's a hypervisor or a virtual machine. You can replace the OVS binaries with an SDN-enabled one and extend that virtual switch from the hypervisor or a virtual machine to become part of a VLAN. It's not a VLAN, it's a logical network. And then at that point, you can tap that VLAN just like you would a physical switch VLAN. And you can monitor traffic, you can do IDS on it, you can even get a little bit more advanced functionality because you can look for unauthorized flows and stop them at the controller level or the management plane level without having to actually be in line with the traffic.
Well, let's think about that one, because OpenFlow exists in Open vSwitch already. You don't necessarily need Nicira to turn it on, but let's assume what you're talking about can be implemented. We have it implemented inside of Amazon. Implemented it because it really does require the underlying hypervisor vendor to implement it. Let's say it is implemented. Could I then go to my SaaS providers that are running inside of Amazon and say, this is the flow I want, and then, as you said, tap it?
Yeah, I don't think you could do that today because there are very few. So Big Switch Networks is the other one besides Nicira. You need to be compatible with one of these SDN controllers. And
all you need is the Open vSwitch, and you just need the OpenFlow protocol that's part of it. Done.
There's APIs involved, so you need to be using API to monitor the setup and creation of the flows to know if it's authorized or not. And so in order for that to happen, you need to be made compatible with the API. So let's take an example of intrusion detection.
I'm just saying, can we use the OpenFlow or whatever SDN APIs we want? I don't want to go into the technical details.
It's technically possible. It's technically possible, but I guess I'm saying for a consumer it's not because it hasn't been done by the vendors yet. But I'm sure that's the direction a lot of these vendors are moving. That's where Big Switch is why they're giving away their controller for free. They used to say a lot of the money to be made in the software-defined networking industry is in the controllers. Big Switch is giving it away for free, and you're actually able to, they're going to make their money off the ecosystem of partners that are writing things like intrusion detection or access control tools that will be SDN compatible.
Now, Phil, would that be able to solve the problem of getting the data out if you can tap it as your own tenant?
Yeah, I think that again because now what they're doing is they're providing some functionality that was similar to what you would see in a traditional data center. So, I can get that. I can get that network type information, which is a great deal. The one thing that you don't have, again, back into, I'm thinking about maybe forensics, and this could be, I know it's a little different, but in terms of services that providers offer, the ability to see what's happening, I still want to see what's happening on those systems that my machines are running on. I think the network traffic, I think a lot of those things. That's the one thing I would request from a cloud provider, simply because this is going very, very esoteric, very theoretical, right? I've got a virtual machine that's got a database that has a key in memory that's using encrypt. If for some reason somehow somebody says your database is compromised, I would like to be able to at some point say, I know that there was nobody that actually logged into that hypervisor that was running that VM, so I know that nobody got there and looked at this. Now, I understand the controls in Amazon, in a lot of the other data centers, are such that the likelihood of that happening, and that's why I'm not going to live or die on that visibility. I would love the network visibility. That would definitely be something that would be huge, but I still don't want to give up that other if at all possible.
Okay. So you want logging, but you also want some sort of network visibility, and ideally you would want to know who did what with inside of the hypervisor you're running upon.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Knowing full well that you may not get names or IDs because it'll have to be tokenized for you to see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And if needed, right, I would expect that if there was a requirement that you could actually track that to a person, right, then it would be something out of band that, let's say, the cloud provider could do, that they would have the ability to actually map that back to an actual individual. I wouldn't need that visibility. The simple fact of, oh, yes, there was somebody who, there was an admin, somebody who logged into this box at this level would be enough visibility for me.
Okay. Michael, would that suffice for the compliance needs that you see?
For any?
For the ones
No.
you see in your common day in, day out.
Yeah, no, the point is to move the ball forward, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Even when you can solve, you see those would solve a lot of the problems.
It's really noisy here. Can you repeat that?
With that combination of being able to tap the network and get tokenized log data of the hypervisor, be able to help solve some of those problems.
Absolutely. And that's the reference architecture we're actually looking to implement in a lot of our customers going forward. Like I said, it's still very conceptual because the vendor support is not in there to process that tokenized data or to be able to do anything based on the tenant ID.
Right now, I'm not even sure you'll be able to produce the tokenized data.
Well, it exists, and there are listener capabilities coming up, like open source sniffer tools, for example, can see the data going across the network, and they can see the tenant ID. But now, taking action or doing something intelligent based on that data is a far ways away yet, still based on development efforts. But that's the direction we're moving.
Okay. Well, Phil, you're the guest, so why don't you have the last word here?
Okay. So last word. For those of you who are in my ballpark, right, or in my shoes and doing it, it's certainly doable. It is some heavy lifting. There are things that you can do. There are things that you can't. For those providers out there, be it SaaS or infrastructure as a service providers, I would, as kind of was stated, push the ball forward. Don't always make your customers ask you for them. Those of you security wonks who work in those companies, right? Be the customer champion and try to get that push through product so that those things go out there. And then, the other thing I'd love to see, and I don't know, we mentioned it on the chat, is something like a cloud audit or some type of industry kind of standard, if you want to use that, to come up with a way that we can share that information and that it's there. And I know there are a number of efforts around that. It just none of them seem to get traction. Hopefully maybe SCAP or something like that will. But I'm in the midst of this, and I'll let you know how it goes at some point in time.
Yeah, please do. Just keep on reporting back. It would be nice to know what's going on.
Yep, I'll definitely do that.
Well, this has been the 99th Virtualization Security Podcast, and I'd like to thank our special guest, Phil Cox, for joining us. And stick around for next week, and in 2 weeks it will be our 100th. Hopefully you can make another appearance and just say a few words for us. We're trying to get everybody there.
That'd be great.
Thank you, Phil.